Hello BookTube, welcome back to AusBooks, where I'm just picking some random Australian themed books I own and talking about them to you. And it seems like we're going in an attempted chronological order here. And also, this isn't the first AusBooks video where I don't have an edition of this book physically, because today I'm going to be talking about the one, the only William Bradley's Voyage to New South Wales. Here it is as an ebook. You can find that at Project Gutenberg for free because it's prehistorically old by this point. But yeah, let's talk about this First Fleet Journal, if you would. William Bradley was a naval officer during the First Fleet in 1787. And the journal, it's pretty much split into two parts. I think so. There's a bit more, but the main two parts we're talking about today is Bradley just documenting what was on the First Fleet. He talks about the supplies, he talks about what cattle was brought on, he lists the names of all the people there. He talks about the weather too during the 8 months. He also talks about the ports they stopped at. Again, a lot of interesting stuff that we've talked about before, that we've seen with Watkins Tench most in particular. What was I going to say? Bradley is on that same high-ranking level as an Arthur Phillip, of course. So he says a lot of stuff that really shines a light on what was going on. Again, I don't think he intended for this to be published at all, really, at least at the time when he was writing it. But yeah, most of this is just him doing impressions about the First Fleet and what it was like and all that. But the main thing we're going to talk about today is when they arrive at Botany Bay, and we get William's impressions of Australia at the time, because William was one of the first people to genuinely try to have a relationship with Indigenous people. He was very much wanted to research them. He was like, I want to learn about their communities and cultures, and he wrote all this down. Like, he interviewed people. Like, he would go and make friends with them, as which is really interesting, because how do you do that when you guys are literally aliens to each other? Like, even hand signals, it's so interesting to read about. And he had a really positive relationship with the Indigenous people at the start, but over time it did sour because of the constant clashing for years. And particularly an interesting part of this moment, this part of the journals, is when Arthur Phillip orders officers to start kidnapping Indigenous people and holding them captive, so the British could learn about them more, at least. And William was very much against this. He talks about it a lot, how uncomfortable it was, and I think it's something he genuinely meant, because I think he just kept on going about it and how shameful and embarrassing it was. But Philip doesn't really mention that as much. It's really interesting to see what can be edited and changed with different journals and all that stuff. But yeah, his relationship with the Aboriginals did sour a lot, and it's just very much day to day. The date, a tiny paragraph of what happened, and that's really it, really. There are so many iconic moments in this journals. I literally live rent free in my mind. Like when these two convicts dividing rations between them, and they get attacked by the Indigenous people with spears and all that. But before, they weren't really that injured. But when they go, the Indigenous people run. They break up their weapons and they run away. And Bradley sees that, he picks up the weapons and go, "Oh my God, this was so well made!" He's really writing it all down, and it's really interesting because this is probably some of the first documentation of that, type of writing when it comes to Indigenous people from a non-Indigenous perspective. And there's so many others. I'm trying to think of all of them now. Bradley does notice that the only reason the British colony was decently successful, why they even lived, was because they had muskets, which is something that muskets trump spears every time, right? But Bradley said, if we didn't have if we didn't have muskets, we would have been killed instantly. From the lack of agricultural knowledge, just everything working against that first 5 years. If we didn't have guns, we would have died, and he knew that. And I think that's really interesting too. He also talks about, again, interviews Indigenous people. It was an interesting moment where a lot of officers start seeing groups of dead Indigenous people, and they realize from the scarring and all that it's smallpox, right? And Bradley's like, "Oh my god, I can't believe they have smallpox here." Like, I imagine him thinking like, "We went all the way across the world, to literally a completely other universe for us, and smallpox is still here." And it shows you how I think unintentional a lot of the damage was. At least that was. There's a lot of other stuff Bradley talks about. And again, he's not very much giving his opinion most of the time. There are like heated moments where he does. Like he's sick of finding dead convicts in the bush with big gashes and all that. And I feel like it really reading these first-hand accounts talks about, or at least shines a light on the fact that the British weren't here and weren't gonna like, we're gonna mow down every Indigenous person, because there's so many accounts of convicts and officers, yes, being surrounded by Indigenous men with weapons and all that, but they got along at certain points, like the officers and convicts would offer to cut the Indigenous people's hair, and then they would give the British a fish, like stuff like that. I feel like it was very dependent on the situation, where if you showed aggression or something like that, maybe there would be retaliation on both sides too. And I think it's just really interesting to read about. And yes, there were peaceful moments, but again, when it got brutal, it got ugly. And I feel like in the grand scheme of Australian history, the British went on to do way worse than this when it comes to laws. Again, when I'm thinking of White Australia or Stolen Generation or a lot of the other conflicts that would happen in the 1800s, decades before the, I hate to say, but in the grand scheme of history, scraps that really happened in the first 5 years. And Bradley documents that. He's really interesting, picks up on little details, and he's really interesting. So Bradley did stay in Australia for a tiny bit, actually. He stayed until 1814, so he got there in, 1787. No, sorry, he stayed until 1791. I got my dates wrong. So yeah, 1887 to 1791 he stayed. Oh my god, I can't say those dates right. 1787 to 1791 he stayed in Australia, right? And after that he went back to England. He was in the French Revolutionary Wars just casually. He did have a lot of struggles with mental health after that. A lot of that I don't know much about because we just don't know that much. We do know that he defrauded like an officer. I don't know what that means, but he was very much stripped of all his ranks and was exiled to France, where he pretty much lived as a hermit for the rest of his life. His family said he was really nice. He had kids and a wife, and they were like he was such a really good man, but whatever mental troubles he had just got the best of him. And when he was exiled, he's really started becoming like an inventor. Like he wanted to invent an instrument to measure longitude, which didn't happen, and he died a recluse pretty much. But his voyage to New South Wales is genuinely one of the most interesting primary I can't say the word documents of early Australia. He was there, boots on the ground, day-to-day life, in a way that really, I think, because he wasn't on that same high rank as, again, Arthur Phillip or Watkins Tench, he focuses on other stuff where the other journals we've talked about so far don't. Again, and I would recommend it. I think it's a really good read. Go check it out on Project Gutenberg. It is, I do think it is good to have a bit of history going in. So again, just go to the Wikipedia page and give that a read, and you'll be fine, really. Or if you're following AusBooks, I think if you've read Cook's journals, Arthur Phillip's journals about Sydney Cove, you'll be fine, really. But yeah, it's probably one of the most interesting so far. Even Watkins Tench, I kind of I like, but I think William Bradley talks about a lot of stuff I think a lot of people don't remember. And just his eye for detail, I think, really makes this book, at least his journals, essential reading. Again, you're going to get the whole, I saw a rainbow today and I ate a lovely piece of fruit. That's really it. But there are some interesting stuff, like when they see Australian animals, a lot of it, especially the kangaroo, because they were like, what on earth is that? And there's accounts of them being like, if you don't want to go face to face with them, if you cut their throat from behind, they won't see you. I think you're such a coward for doing that. Face them like a man. But also, seeing platypuses and all that stuff. Again, really interesting stuff, and really good read. But again, I think you do need to know a bit of context, and also I think it's more interesting when you compare it, when you put it in its history. I think Bradley's journals really shine. But yeah, that's your AusBook recommendation for today. William Bradley's Voyage to New South Wales. Go check it out if you haven't. And yeah, have you read it? Let me know what you think. And thank you so much for watching BookTube, and I will see you next time.